Backstage, the vibe was tremendous. Music reverberating, cameras flashing, and anxiety so intense that a knife might pierce it. However, what began as just another one of the most startling emotional breakdowns the business has seen this year occurred on the night of Jim Jones and Chrissy Lampkin. According to witnesses, Chrissy's tears weren't just due to stress. They were the result of severe treachery, the sort that leaves scars that are impossible to conceal from the public eye. And he snapped at Jim. Jim reportedly rushed out shortly after Chrissy's emotional meltdown, yelling, pacing, screaming, seeking explanations that no one dared to provide. As his shout reverberated down the hallway, the backstage staff froze, his rage setting off a scenario right out of a failed reality program. What was the last straw for him? Did someone say anything? Or did someone appear out of the blue? This was more than a romantic dispute, according to insiders. Then, after years of unsolved conflict, at last, the audience saw the explosion of renown and devotion. Cameras were rolling, phones were out, and now fans are putting together what actually happened down before security intervened during those tumultuous minutes. This was a collision between pride and love, not simply a battle. An anguish that the whole business experienced. Hold on tight, because what happened backstage might potentially alter Jim Jones and Chrissy's relationship forever. Lampkin. The mood backstage during the events was especially strained. Typically, there was a cadence and a tacit understanding between Jim Jones and Chrissy Lampkin. That maintained their equilibrium despite the constant demands of reality TV production. But something didn't feel right tonight. Jim's face had a hardness to it, and Chrissy's voice had a faint edge from the time they arrived. It was evident to everybody who collaborated with them. It was muttered by the stylists. Even security seemed to be on high alert as the camera team exchanged anxious looks. The most of the afternoon had been spent in silence as Chrissy sat by herself in the makeup chair, browsing through her phone. Her typically composed manner gave way to a sense of anxiety, and she couldn't stop looking at Jim, who was talking to his team across the corridor. Jim, for his part, attempted to seem cool, resting against the wall, nodding periodically, but the tightness in his jaw revealed his irritation. Both of them were under a lot of stress due to personal problems and production obligations. At last, the stress exploded, when a casual remark was made by one of Jim's long-standing crew members, whom he had complete faith in. Already tense, Chrissy lost her temper. Her voice was harsh but shaking as she asked, "You think that's funny?" Although it was a little remark in context, seemed to be the last straw. Jim approached her with his hands up in a calming motion, but Chrissy wouldn't have it. Firmly, "Don't step in," she said. "You are not the focus of this. Respect is at issue here." Normally kind and gentle, her eyes were icy and ferocious. The vibe in the backstage area changed, though the stress of the moment had subsided. A full-fledged altercation ensued. The dispute swiftly got out of hand. Chrissy's voice lifted, her words piercing the room with a mixture of pain and rage. "You let them treat me disrespectfully every time. You pick them over me each and every time." Jim's first reaction was defensive. "They are not my preference over you. I just cannot exert control over everyone." As he tried to explain himself, his tone was stiff and his irritation was clear. Silently, his crew observed, divided between allegiance and to him and apprehension of being caught in the crossfire. Jim's closest friend attempted to resolve the situation. "Hey, you guys need to relax. Not in this place. Not right now." However, Chrissy turned on him, giving him a harsh stare. "Please don't tell me to relax. You contribute to the issue." The whole crew became quiet. In a matter of minutes, Jim and Chrissy's once unbreakable relationship had fallen apart. With her heels clicking, Chrissy ran toward her changing room, violently on the ground. Jim muttered to himself as he trailed behind by a few feet. Every second was captured by the cameras, depicting a rift in a relationship that people had long appreciated, rather than merely a disagreement. Voices became much louder inside the changing room. Jim was accused by Chrissy of prioritizing his crew allegiance above their relationship. Jim, however, maintained his stance, stating that his team deserved respect since they had been with him before he became famous. However, nothing was resolved by the words. They just brought to light the underlying conflict that had been developing for some months. According to crew workers, it was the most heated dispute they had ever seen between the pair. Despite production's best efforts, the emotions were unable to be contained. Chrissy and Jim weren't only arguing, they were revealing years of pain, annoyance, and unsaid complaints. After a few anxious minutes, Chrissy's feelings finally came out. And she lost it everything. Her unadulterated tears reverberated throughout the changing room. Jim was taken by surprise, wasn't sure whether to put his distance from her or console her. Unsure of how to cope with the intensity, the team was paralyzed. For they had seen fights and confrontations over the years, but nothing with the emotional weight of this, anything so unvarnished, so intimate, and so public. At last, Jim moved in closer, his own annoyance mixed with worry. He tried to maintain his composure as he added, "Look, Chrissy, I don't want this to get worse." However, his remarks just appeared to make her angrier. Even terrible. "This has been going on for years, Jim. You want me to grin and go on after allowing others to treat me disrespectfully and condescendingly?" She spoke with ferocity. Jim's eyes narrowed and his jaw tensed. He had waited. He had exercised caution, yet this time a mix of pain and fatigue drove him over the brink. His voice boomed in the cramped room as he yelled, "Enough!" Everybody in the room. The ferocity made me jump. I will not allow anybody to speak to me or my family in this manner. Some of the crew members had worked with Jim for more than 10 years, exchanging anxious looks. They had seen his anger, but Chrissy's degree of rage combined with her emotional frankness was something quite different. A cut was indicated by production, but the excitement in the room was too strong to ignore. Chrissy's voice shook, but it didn't become silent. "What about my family and yours? How about me? I'm left to pick up the pieces while you constantly look out for everyone else." Jim's hands remained firm, although his gaze softened a little. Clenched. "Chrissy, I'm not perfect. You are aware of it. It's not easy, but I try. Everyone around me is beyond my control. However, you have power over your reaction." She fired back. "You have the option to defend me, but you choose not to. It seems like I'm invisible now that you've forgiven me." It was electrifying in the room now. Some crew members secretly recorded as they silently took their phones out. The situation, a private altercation that ended up in a public setting, exacerbated the already high level of anxiety. With each look, every word and action was amplified. Jim tried to collect himself by massaging his temples. "I don't want to argue with you, Chrissy. Not in this manner." Chrissy's voice pierced the air, accusing and frantic. "So, Jim, why do we keep getting here? Why must there always be a fight? I can't continue like this. I'm worn out." Everyone in the room could not handle the emotional intensity. While some crew members remained still due to the seriousness of the event, others discreetly departed, unwilling to see more. The cameras continued to record, expressing unfiltered feelings that were impossible to write. Anger, fury, love, and tears all came crashing together in one explosive moment. After a while, Chrissy turned and stormed out of the dressing room and into the hallway. After a little while, Jim followed, more subdued, but clearly rattled now. With their enthusiasm evident, the two passed the rest of the group, creating a tense environment that persisted long after they disappeared. The set was more subdued and cautious when the producers tried to start shooting again later that evening. Members of the crew murmured about the recent events. Some speculated that the dispute would alter the show's trajectory. Others were worried about how it may affect upcoming episodes. In contrast, Jim and Chrissy avoided one another in the halls, only sharing fleeting looks that revealed a great deal about unsolved feelings. A dot. By night's end, it was obvious that this was no ordinary altercation. This marked a sea change. Neither Chrissy nor Jim could ignore the tempest that had erupted from years of devotion, trust, and underlying frustrations. Additionally, although cameras only recorded yet, those backstage experiences would reverberate throughout their lives. Even when they parted ways, Kay and their love persisted long after the lights went down. The confrontation's weight hovered in the air. Social media insiders conjectured, crew members muttered, and production attempted to figure out how to deal with the fallout. However, one thing was for sure. Backstage, this intense scene wasn't brief. Disagreement. It was the unvarnished, unadulterated truth of love, celebrity, and devotion put to the ultimate test. And the next chapter in the narrative of Jim Jones and Chrissy Lynn would be defined by it. The morning after the violent outburst backstage, the Love and Hip Hop Atlanta set had a strained, uncomfortable vibe. The staff was tense since everyone had heard rumors about what had happened. Although the cameras were rolling, there was a considerable rigidity in the air. Chrissy Lamon and Jim Jones came separately, both exuding a controlled enthusiasm that hardly disguised their emotional weariness and dissatisfaction. Jim entered first, his eyes drawn low and his face shielded by shades. He walked by the cameras and crew with his head down and his shoulders almost imperceptibly rigid. His team followed in silence, each participant conscious of the tension that persisted. Tone, who had attempted to mediate the night before, remained near Jim. His face showed a combination of anxiety and worry. Everyone was aware that the previous night's quarrel was more than simply a heated exchange. It had exposed relational flaws that had been brewing under the surface for a while. Chrissy showed up later, seeming calm on the inside but anxious on the outside. Her normally refined manner had a little edge, and she walked the corridor with exact steps. As she walked to her dressing room, she completely avoided making eye contact with Jim and instead concentrated on her phone. Production personnel promptly escorted before the cameras began to film, to stop any further altercation. The stillness between her and Jim was stifling. By mid-morning, it was full with whispered words and unsolved tension. The previous evening's leaked video had already begun to circulate on the internet. The Globe watched as intimate feelings were revealed in public as fans analyzed every moment, recreating the furious dispute between Chrissy and Jim. According to sources, the film showed Chrissy accusing Jim of habitually preferring his crew above her. Jim, however, stood up for himself, saying he had no influence on what others around him did. Despite its briefness, the video depicted feelings of betrayal, resentment, and unadulterated feeling. To resolve the matter, producers arranged a private meeting with Chrissy and Jim. Although there were no cameras, the stakes were elevated. Everyone was aware of how serious the situation was. Jim crossed his arms and clenched his teeth as he sat back in his chair. With her hands held firmly in her lap and an enigmatic but strained look, Chrissy sat opposite him. The manufacturer made a cautious start. "We must choose our course of action. Fans are responding to the video that has been released. You two have a choice. Address it on camera to prevent things from becoming worse." Chrissy spoke quietly but firmly. "It's not about taking it to the camera. This has to do with limits, loyalty, and respect." There was no argument for the cameras. It occurred as a result of years of unresolved problems. Jim's voice was husky and low when he eventually spoke. "I am aware. Although I didn't manage it properly, I also didn't anticipate it becoming so out of control. It wasn't intended to go public. The strain was still heavy and unforgiving." They were both aware that the events backstage were more than a battle. Long-standing rifts in their relationship were exposed. The production and personnel employees listened in silence, realizing that this was a crucial time. Throughout the day, Jim and Chrissy made an effort to the shots without reigniting tension. Conversations were tracked, scenes were carefully prepared, and relationships were maintained in a professional manner. However, the every word and every look had importance because of the emotional residue from the night before. Members of the crew muttered to one another, worrying about the potential long-term effects of this disagreement on the pair. Between shoots, Chrissy confided in one of her closest pals in a quiet time. On the set, "I can't continue to feel unimportant and invisible in his universe. Although he is devoted to everyone else, I'm simply supposed to accept it and move on from it." Her companion, who was worried about the public reaction, nodded sympathetically. She answered, "You're right to feel that way. However, you also need to think about how this would seem on camera. Every word will be analyzed by fans. Jim met with his team to talk about the leak in the meantime. Already the video had sparked conjecture and speculations, and the production's integrity was at risk. Tone was the first to speak, seeming nervous. "I promise I didn't leak, Jim. Last night, I didn't even check my phone." Jim's gaze became strained. "I'm not sure who done it, but I'm not going to overlook the fact that someone violated the confidence of everyone present." As the allegations flowed silently, the conversation heated up among the team. On the outside, Jim seemed composed, but on the inside, he was furious. Years of devotion, confidence, having revealed his past to these people, had been put to the test in a manner he never anticipated. The feeling of treachery was more intense as it sprang from within his own social group. Chrissy's team started planning how to respond to the public in the meantime. The objective was to preserve her honor, while admitting the actual mental stress she had gone through. Friends advised her to make a statement, highlighting her need for limits and respect. Chrissy, however, hesitated. She preferred truth to fiction. She added, "I don't want to skirt the truth. I want people to know why I had the reaction that I had." By the afternoon, emotions erupted once again in a less spectacular but no less intense exchange. Jim had a private confrontation with one of the suspicious crew members, requesting clarification. "Was that you? Have you leaked the video?" With a calm voice, he asked but keen. Although the crew member denied any participation, the suspicion persisted, casting a shadow over the whole set. Jim was aware of the leaker's name would ultimately come to light, but the harm was already done. And as the day went on, the emotional toll became apparent. Jim secluded himself with his team, planning, while Chrissy retreated into her dressing room and concentrated on practicing lines. On the future steps. The anguish felt by both parties was evident. Fame, pressure, and loyalty had clashed with love, trust, and loyalty, exposed in a manner neither could have predicted. Production set up a mediated conversation between Chrissy and Jim late at night to try to make amends and make everything clear. Establish boundaries going forward. The cameras were off, but everyone knew that this discussion would establish the tone for the rest of the shooting. Jim entered the conference with a wary, guarded demeanor. Calm but obviously anxious, Jim said, "I don't want to fight like last night, but I can't pretend it didn't happen." Chrissy's answer was calm yet firm. "I just want respect, not pretending. Devotion to me as you do to all the other people in your life." Jim sighed. "You're correct. I didn't manage it right." Chrissy's guard went up a little, but it stayed up. I became defensive rather than listening. "Jim, it's not only about hearing. It's also about realizing that my sentiments are important, that when things become hot, I'm not invisible." The lengthy and emotionally draining talk represented the first time they had spoken about the main points from the night before. It wasn't a conclusion, but it was a beginning. And they both knew that rebuilding. As shooting concluded for the evening, the reality of the situation hit in, and social media was already ablaze with the anticipation that building trust with one another and others around them would need time and work. Fans were analyzing every second of the leaked video, and Jim and Chrissy tried to remain calm while knowing that the world would be watching them closely. Would only get worse. They thought about what had transpired in private. "We can't let this define us," Jim murmured softly. "We need to be stronger for ourselves and for everyone watching." Chrissy nodded. There was a ray of optimism despite the tumult. They had been driven to the brink, yet they had to face long-standing problems because of this disagreement, as unvarnished and unadulterated as it was, endured the storm together. And while the public would still observe, criticize, and conjecture behind the scenes, the actual task of restoring confidence had only just started. Setting limits and demonstrating that their bond could endure not just the cameras but also the turmoil of celebrity, treachery, and unfiltered passion. When the evening came to a conclusion, Jim and Chrissy withdrew to their own areas, separated by distance but absorbing the events in their minds. Unspoken knowledge that this event will permanently alter their relationship, the disagreement, the leaks, and the emotional collapse weren't a passing phase, setback. They served as a wake-up call and a turning moment in the world of cameras, glitter, and glamour. Emotions have repercussions. The love and hip-hop Atlanta scene seemed like a powder keg the morning after the heated altercations. Everyone was aware of the tension between Chrissy Lampkin and Jim Jones. Who came first? His customary swagger replaced with a guarded, anxious energy. His hood was drawn down, sunglasses were covering his eyes, and his jaw was clenched, revealing the underlying annoyance. Walked through the set with a measured composure, his crew following closely behind him in a quiet but attentive manner. Knowing that any mistake may rekindle the tension, one of Jim's closest buddies remained at his side. Chrissy soon followed. She walked past the cameras with her customary composure, avoiding Jim despite a slight slant in her stance that revealed the emotional fatigue she carried. Completely, heading straight to her dressing room as the production crew rushed to remove her from any possible conflicts. Both knew that the day would be challenging since the lingering animosity between them and the emotional impact from the previous night were still fresh. Noticeable. By mid-morning, rumors about the leaked video started to circulate silently within